Okay, we're good to go. Alexander, how are you?
I'm very well. Beautifully stormy day here in London. We've got a storm Eunice blowing around us.
Yeah.
So that's all very exciting. People in the United States, people in these hurricane regions would love this kind of wind. But for us, it's always pretty dramatic here.
Yeah, I read that the roof on the O2 Center was a part of it was torn off,
blown off
from the storm. Yeah,
torn off.
Incredible.
Well, that tells you how solidly built. That tells you how solidly built Tony Blair's O2 Center is. That was supposed to be a Millennium Dome, by the way. We will draw the curtain.
It's called the Millennium. It's called the Millennium Dome, or the O2.
It was originally it was originally built as the Millennium Dome. It was going to be in a big exhibition there, which flopped catastrophically to celebrate the millennium, and then it became the O2 O2 Dome. There you go.
Got it. All right, welcome everybody to Alive. Welcome to everyone who is joining us from Locals. Welcome to our Locals chat, and welcome everybody who's joining us here on YouTube. And welcome to our moderators, our awesome moderators. Alan Watson is with us, and Zarael is with us, and I think that's it. Two moderators in the house. Thank you very much, guys, for helping us out.
Yeah.
And let's jump into it, Alexander, because
I agree. Let's go straight in. I mean, everybody knows what the news is. So let's just go ahead and ask.
Wherever you're joining us, wherever you're joining us in the world, whether it's in Canada, in Egypt, and Croatia, in the UK, and Duran, in the US. And Connecticut and London and Indiana and Serbia, Australia, New Zealand, Italy, Romania. Hello to everybody, wherever you are, in Israel and Armenia, Philippines. Good to have you with us, Alexander. Hello, Indonesia. Good to have you here in Melbourne. Yes, Viva Fry. Thank you very much to the Viva Fry channel, to Robert Barnes as well for hosting us. That was a very, very fun show. And it is a fantastic channel on YouTube. And of course, go to their Locals channel as well. Fantastic channel, great content. And we thank them very much for having us on their side.
Absolutely.
Show.
And for following the events in Canada, indispensable.
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. If you want to, see what's going on in Canada, that is the channel to go to, without a doubt. And we are going to talk about Canada, Alexander, because the title of this live is, look at Russia, everybody. Don't look at what's going on in Canada. I took a thumbnail from the movie The Prestige. I don't know if you saw it, with Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman, where they're the two magicians. Anyway. The whole thing to me is we've talked a lot about the reasons for all of this Russia stuff, but the real story, what's really going down in Canada is astonishing, and the mainstream media in the U.S. is desperately trying to avoid it, or they're trying to demonize the protesters. Meanwhile, they're playing up hysteria with regards to a Russia invasion of Ukraine. Blinken was in front of the UN, and what a speech. Biden talked to the press before he got onto Air Force One, and he was completely lost. But the invasion that was supposed to happen on Wednesday has now been pushed to, I believe, the 20th is like a tentative date. But Blinken in front of the UN said that it's in the coming days, so it can happen. Whenever. Who knows? In the coming days, and we don't want to downplay what's happening in Lugansk and Donetsk. I mean, there's fighting, and it has ticked up, but I'll say on my part, since I've been following this story for so many years, whenever there has been violence on the contact line, and it has been violent, it's always been manageable, especially by the militia in East Ukraine and by the Russians. They've always managed the situation. I'm not saying people's lives have not been lost and people have suffered. They have, but it's never gotten to the point where another civil war had to break out. It was always managed to a certain extent. And I believe the same is happening now. And I don't think what's happening on the contact line will warrant a full-on invasion like Blinken described in front of the UN. Wow, Alexander, did he describe? I mean, he was talking helicopters and missiles and cyber attacks and God, I mean, he was It's crazy.
I mean, it was deranged. It was deranged.
Yeah.
It was absolutely deranged. I mean, what is going on in the on the contact line at the moment is is exchanges of fire by small arms. I mean, when I say small arms, I mean grenade launchers, heavy machine guns, anti-tank missiles, those sorts of things. We're not seeing heavy artillery being used, and that's a fundamental distinction. There was a real intention to start something serious. We would see heavy artillery shelling, and we haven't seen anything like that at the moment. And neither side is reporting any deaths so far. So yes, we see these sort of things happen a lot. This is a particularly nasty episode. I suspect, thinking about it, that it was probably timed for the UN Security Council session that you just mentioned, and of course the anniversary of the Minsk agreement. But I suspect it will die down over the next couple of days because, as you rightly said, it's always been contained up to now. And I'm sure that's your analysis is absolutely right. Who would start a war in the Donbass at this time?
Can you just stay on that point, Alexander?
And be destroyed.
Alexander, real quick before you get into that, just two quick questions related to what you just said. One is the contact line is in Ottawa. It's a great comment, but the kindergarten being shelled. Can you address that? Because I see a lot of people talking about that.
Yeah, there are lots of people talking about that. The kindergarten, it should be said, is on the Ukrainian side of the contact line. And this is where I think there's an awful lot of misunderstanding at the very early reports, because the very, very early reports that I was seeing early in the morning yesterday, they seem to suggest that some people in the Western media thought that it was on the Donbass side, the militia side of the contact line. And that was why you had all the talk about this being a false flag, an attempted false flag. And it was only as the day progressed that it realized that it was on the Ukrainian side. And that basically resulted in an adjustment. I'm sorry to say that when there's exchanges of fire like this along the contact line, buildings like this do get damaged. Nobody was killed. Apparently some people were injured, but not very seriously. The contact line snakes through little villages and towns and settlements right across the Donbass. And these are, in many cases, still inhabited places. So when fighting happens and it flares up, then places like this do get hit, and damage does get done. I don't think this was a deliberate attack on this kindergarten by anybody. I think it was just an accident, frankly. It was a tragic thing that happens, but fortunately nobody was killed.
All right. So, Alexander, you were saying before I interrupted you with the kindergarten, you were talking a little bit more about what's going on in Ukraine, and then you can pivot real quick to the real contact line. I really like that comment in Locals. The real contact line is in Ottawa, and you can talk about the terrible crackdown from Trudeau and Freeland in Canada. So,
indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, we must not underestimate. I mean, what is happening in the Ukrainian contact line. I mean, this is a very big flare up of shooting. I mean, but I don't think it's going to escalate into anything bigger. But the situation in Canada is catastrophic. Now, I want to make a quick observation. I am quite sure in my own mind that what Trudeau is doing, using this War Powers Act, is unconstitutional and illegal. It's been done without any proper debate in the Canadian House of Commons, the Canadian Parliament, and it is a grotesque abuse of wartime powers intended in the situation where there's a true emergency, either a war or, as happened on the one previous occasion when these powers were used, when there was a major terrorist incident. It's been used in order to deal with what is ultimately and in effect a political industrial dispute, an expression by Canadian people, Canadians, of their rights to protest, to argue for their, for what they want, for the end to practices, restrictions which have been imposed on them. And we've talked on the Duran many times about the fact that Trudeau was almost certainly going to work towards a crackdown, because that is the authoritarian person, I was going to use a stronger word, that he is, and we now see it happen, and it's being conducted in a totally unconstitutional and unlawful way. And Jonathan Turley, has come in for a lot of criticism for saying this in the United States, but he is absolutely right. These powers, these equivalent powers, if they'd been used in the United States in the 1960s, would have had the same kind of reasoning behind them that Trudeau is using to justify these attacks on the truckers. They could have been used against the civil rights movement. I'm not going to name some names because we're on YouTube. They could have been used against the civil rights movement in the 1960s, because the civil rights movement in the 1960s was doing exactly the same kind of things that the truckers are doing, and that those kind of powers were not used against the civil rights movement in the 60s, and they should not be used against the truckers today.
Yeah. It is such a huge story that they're going after people's bank accounts. They're going after crypto. The fact that the GiveSendGo was hacked, I wonder by who, and all the information was conveniently leaked to the media, and publications like the Washington Post published people's names and doxed them. I mean, it's talk about authoritarian, tyrannical, underhanded, just disgusting behavior from the powers in Canada and the U.S., which seems to be helping them. I mean, the Biden White House seems to be helping
we did
them.
a program. We did a program about this telephone exchange between Biden and Trudeau, in which it was quite clear that Biden was egging Trudeau on. And of course, all sorts of other US officials have been egging Trudeau along as well. And what we're seeing is, as I said, a gross, unconstitutional abuse of power in a massive authoritarian direction. One would like to believe that the courts in Canada will at some point step in, but I have few hopes of that. And realistically, what's happened in Canada calls into question whether Canadian democracy and whether Canada can even be considered a democracy any longer. Bear in mind that Trudeau has accused the truckers of trying to overthrow his government, of trying to seek regime change there. Well, I don't know whether Trudeau himself has done it, but some people in his government have done it. That is completely flat out untrue. But it's been done in order to justify these enormous misuse of powers. And of course, it's been done once. It will be done again. In fact, it's going to become permanent.
Yeah. Does it worry you that they're doing this? I mean, does this seem like some sort of trial balloon scenario?
Well, of course it worries me. I mean, it should worry everybody. Everybody should be worried when a government acts illegally and unconstitutionally in this grotesquely authoritarian way, abusing war powers in order to deal with a civil protest. That should worry people enormously. And this is not just a trial balloon, it's an example. If Trudeau succeeds in doing this, which, at the moment he's pressing on, but if he succeeds, you see this repeated in country after country. Long after this problem, with the Kufu's gone, that's the issue of the time. But eventually, it will spread, and it will be used for every conceivable protest that might arise, except, of course, when it's the kind of protests we saw in the United States in over the course of 2020, when peaceful protesters, as we remember, or largely peaceful protesters, were doing all sorts of things, which, of course, the powers in the United States were encouraging them to do, even though those protests were genuinely violent and involved genuine massive damage to property, whereas these protests by the truckers have been generally peaceful.
Yeah. I'm going to get to some questions real quick, Alexander, because we have a lot of questions that we want to get to. And welcome, Cosmic Rain, moderating as well. And I also want to give a shout out to Gonzalo Lira. Thank you very much, Gonzalo, as well, for your taking the time for that show in talking about Ukraine, and you being in Ukraine really helped shed some light as to what's going on. So we got to do another show with Gonzalo, because he's on the ground and he knows exactly what's going on in Ukraine. But before I get to the questions, Alexander, one more question to you. In the past 2 years, it seems that we've lost our bodily autonomy. We've lost control of our body to the state. And now it seems that we've lost control of our finances, our banking accounts to the states. In other words, you know, you could have a bank account and you can have $50 or $5 million. It doesn't matter anymore, because if Trudeau succeeds in what he's doing, then you really don't own anything. You don't own your own body. You don't own your own finances. I mean, this action that Freeland announced the other day really took things to a different level.
Absolutely, yes. Well, I mean, exactly, to a completely different level, one which 10 years ago, 20 years ago, would have been inconceivable in Western democracies. And this has happened in not just any Western democracy. It's happened in Canada, which has been one of the freest. So if it can happen in Canada, it can happen anywhere. And you summed it up exactly correctly. This is a direct, by the way, there is a direct line to this from what you experienced in Cyprus back in 2013, when they were taking money out of your bank account in Cyprus. This is justified at that time, excused at that time as being necessary to deal with the financial crisis. But of course, they went directly against deposit holders, because one bank in Cyprus had financial problems. Deposit holders in every bank in Cyprus found money being taken out of their deposits. That was already an astonishing, arbitrary increase in power, and that was justified on economic grounds. Well, we now see how it's been justified on political grounds as well. So property rights, right to private property in the West is now under threat. I mean, we now see governments willing to confiscate people's properties. They've been able to do that. They've been doing it for a while, of course, using the sanctions weapon. Now they've got, and remember, you know, people can be sanctioned for all kinds of reasons. It isn't just Russians and Iranians who get sanctioned. You can bypass the courts now by having individuals sanctioned. There's no real right to respond to that. And now we've seen this being taken a whole step further, the misuse of war powers in order to seize money from people's private bank accounts without any intervention from the courts, without any redress or remedy. And if they seize money, they impose medical treatments on people. Well, there's no stopping them. This is a slide like I would never have imagined or could have believed I would ever see.
Yeah, something similar in Lebanon as well. I'm just looking at the chat as well. Absolutely. Real quick, Alexander, with going back to my experiences in Cyprus and how they relate to Canada, two things. When it happened and when they went into people's bank accounts, it was very quick. At first, people didn't take the government serious. Yeah. I mean, I remember they were, oh, no, nothing's going to happen. It's going to be okay. And it was literally overnight that they went in and they grabbed everything. And it was always on a weekend. Remember, they do the money grabs always on weekends or holidays. You got to remember that. It was on a Friday night, and the next morning on Saturday, you have nothing left, and they do it on purpose because obviously they don't want it during the workday. So whenever they do these things, it's always on some sort of holiday or on the weekends. The other interesting point is that when they did the money grab in Cyprus and they confiscated people's money, about 2 weeks later, they gave a loan to Ukraine for 20 billion. So Cyprus needed 10 billion to bail out its banks. The EU said, no, we're not going to give you 10 billion. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a bail-in. In other words, we're going to take people's money to pay for all of your debt. Pretty much that's what happened. And then literally 2 weeks later, they gave 20 billion to Ukraine in order to fund the war. The same kind of thing happened just now is going on just now. It just is going on now in Canada and in the US. They're saying we're going to go in, we're going to take your money, or we have the right to take your money, while at the same time they're pumping money to Ukraine, 500 million and 1 billion, and they're just sending it off to Ukraine.
Absolutely.
What happens to that money? That money goes into Ukraine, goes right back out to Ukraine and into the pockets of all of these guys. I mean, it is such a freaking racket that they're pulling. And anyway, I just thought it was interesting that back then the money was stolen, and then they were also giving it to Ukraine, and now you have the possibility of confiscation. And of course, where are they giving money to? To Ukraine again.
And they're doing the same with countries now, because of course the administration has just seized the money in Afghanistan's central bank. They're giving half of it to 9/11, to the families of 9/11 survivors. Well, that's done to conceal the fact that the other 3.5 billion, the other half of it, is being given to various NGOs. And of course, we know what that means. These are not just NGOs that engage in humanitarian activities. Well, it's the administration that's going to decide which those NGOs are. So they're redistributing the money in Afghanistan's central bank to their friends. I mean, that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, there's no justification for this. I mean, you could just about justify the freezing of the money in the Afghan central bank's reserves. I mean, it was difficult to justify, but you could just about do it. But this isn't a freeze. This is an outright seizure.
It's crazy. It's crazy, man. Alexander, do you think there's any chance that NATO could be invoked to put down the truckers? They could redefine trucks as weapons, and following the NATO treaty to be invoked. So it's an armed attack which threatens the security of the country, so that it would qualify under Article 5 of the NATO treaty. I think that's an interesting comment.
That's a very interesting comment.
You do have some NATO countries, i.e. the US, helping Trudeau in this.
Once upon a time, I would have said that's inconceivable. I would have, laughed at that kind of question. But now, look what's happening already. How can we possibly exclude possibilities like that? I think it's entirely possible. Maybe not this time, but bear in mind, it's already been said that the truckers are seeking regime change in Canada. So I mean, if that's the case, then well, maybe to defend Canada or any other country that experiences this sort of thing from regime change, well, you could do that. You might be able to do those sort of things. Just to give you an idea of how extreme this is. I can remember previous periods of intense unrest in countries. I can just remember the protests in France in May 1968. My mother was caught up in them. She was in Paris at the time, and she gave me many descriptions of them. They were, much more violent, much more extensive, and there was a real effort then to get de Gaulle to step down. Did he seize people's money from their bank accounts? Of course not. And I also lived through the very intense period of industrial unrest that took place in Britain in the 1970s. I remember that very well. Again, did the government at that time, Conservative and to some extent Labour, did they seize money from people's accounts? Did they talk about the attempt to overthrow the government? And bear in mind, some of the shop stewards, some of the trade union leaders who were involved in those strikes in Britain in the 70s, they were actually communists. I mean, members of the British Communist Party. Did they seek to seize the private money held by people in their bank accounts? Of course not. But now we see it happen. And if it happens in Canada, one of the most stable democracies in the West, well, it can happen anywhere else.
Yeah. Where's Victoria Nuland in Ottawa passing out cookies?
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
I thought when there's regime changes going on, their revolution, she pops up with her.
Well, this is a regime change. It's not a regime change by the truckers. It's a regime change by the government. They are tearing up the constitutional and democratic order in Canada and replacing it with something else.
Say that again. Say that again for everyone to hear, especially for everyone in Canada to hear. That is exactly right. It is a regime change, but it's the Trudeau government tearing apart the Constitution of Canada.
Exactly. And its political system and its historic and traditional way of life.
Well said. Let's see. RT is reporting Donetsk region in Ukraine is being evacuated.
I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen it. Okay, Donetsk region, like you said, Alexander, there's a lot of villages in and around there as well. So I mean, it's
yes.
I don't think they mean the downtown areas and stuff like that.
Yes.
But
yes. Anyway, we'll see.
We'll see. We'll be monitoring it.
We'll be monitoring it. Yeah.
As we said in the beginning of the video, we've had in the past 7-8 years very big flare-ups. This is not the first time we've had these types of flare-ups, but
yes,
obviously things are tense.
Obviously very tense.
All right, Raphael says, you guys are changing the Security Council into a clown show. 500 years from now, people will be writing books about this phrase, insane time. Yeah, what a clown show of a speech. Blinken actually brought up in the speech Colin Powell's WMD performance at the UN. That's how bad it is when Blinken has to actually reference Colin Powell and say, look, this is not like it was with Colin Powell. That's when you know they're lying.
Exactly. That's exactly right. It's exactly correct. When you know that they're lying.
Let's see. Raphael says, explain this to me. You are the one calling. Conversations last many times for almost 2 hours, and Russia is the one who is afraid. Putin never talks.
Putin never talks. Absolutely true. Well, he does talk, and he's provided lots of comments and information, and he meets world leaders. He says all sorts of things. So he does talk, and he talks sensibly, but he doesn't come up with these hysterical comments and over the top language that we see.
The foreign ministry in Russia came out again with a statement and told everybody to calm down after Joe Biden's little rant before he got on Air Force One. Yeah,
absolutely.
So Russia once again is saying, everybody calm down. We're not going to invade. This is crazy. Raphael says, I wonder if everyone understands clearly that submarine, aircraft carrier, battleships are obsolete in the next World War. Newspapers are writing it.
Yeah. I'm not a military person, so I'm not going to be, I can't give you an analysis of these sort of things. But with hypersonic weapons now appearing, I have to say that an aircraft carrier today looks desperately vulnerable, at least to me, to my untutored, unmilitary eyes. I'd have thought it'd be an extremely dangerous thing to sort of deploy aircraft carriers anywhere close to hypersonic weapons now.
Yeah. Let's see. Rope Butte says, the Duran, have you heard of Monero? Yes, I have. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see here. Zoran says, Serbian and Hungary here. Much love, peeps. Thank you, Zoran, for that super chat, and greetings to everybody in Hungary and in Serbia. Raphael says, guys, I'm following you in YouTube, Locals, Rumble, which you guys are not on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. You guys need to reach everyone. Well, yeah, I don't think we'll ever be on TikTok.
No,
Twitter, we left, and Facebook
we left Facebook, but we left. It had become impossible, to be straightforward.
Yeah, it was voluntary. We left it on our own accord. Satoshi said, Satoshi's a new member. Satoshi, welcome to the Duran community. And Raphael says, Washington Times article 18 hours ago, Russia could win World War II. World War II or World War III? I think. Are we paying attention to this, guys? It is a done deal. Russia and China is real.
Oh, absolutely. Of course it is. And it is a done deal. As I said, there's been this legal this joint statement. There's no question about it that it is a done deal. And is that a preparation for World War III? I don't think so. And I think if they were talking about World War III, straightforwardly, no one would win.
Yeah. Gender neutral. Thank you for your super chat. And another super chat from Gender Neutral says, Bitcoin, safe haven or mirage? Venezuelans are warning to spend cash now while it still has value. The question is on what? Land, Bitcoin, gold, silver, emergency food?
No.
What do you spend it on?
What do you spend it on exactly? Yes. Well, we've had supply shortages in Venezuela, and of course, we're seeing supply shortages in other places. Maybe not as bad as Venezuela, but maybe Venezuela was the shape of things to come. We'll see.
Megawit, thank you for your super sticker. And Zarael says, on the topic of truckers, this could backfire fast, and even in the near future. All I say is autonomous trucks. Was this provoked to push this agenda? Self-driving trucks. Yeah.
I wonder. Well, that's a good point, actually. I don't know. I mean, I simply don't know. What I would say is whatever this was, what we're seeing in Canada is extremely sinister. Yeah. Extremely sinister.
Yeah. David March, welcome to the Duran community. Great to have you here. And Kurt says, is it true with the evacuation? Civilians have to be evacuated to Russia. Sources RT News.
Yes, I've just seen it. Unfortunately, there's very little information. There's just a headline: breakaway Ukrainian region orders evacuation. Civilians must flee from rebel-held Donetsk region to Russia, its head says. But without actually seeing the full statement, and it's not been published, we haven't seen it yet. I don't quite know what that means. And I think until we've actually got some proper explanation of this and seen the statement and the comments, then, as I said, I'm not going to jump ahead and analyze something which we haven't really got the full text of.
Given what the U.S. has said about Russia's invasion, what would it take for Russia to invade now? I mean, do you understand my question? I mean, given everything that the U.S. has been saying now, and the fact that Russia's been saying we're not going to invade, what would it take for Russia to say, you know what, we have to invade now? I mean, who cares what they've been saying in the media for the past 2 months? We have to do it.
A Ukrainian offensive against the Donbass. So that is what would be needed, I think. A major Ukrainian attack, signs that the Ukrainian army is advancing, and then retaliation from the Russians would follow.
From, let's see, David, in Canada, our entire way of life is being destroyed. I'm glad my grandmother never gave up her Polish citizenship. Time to get mine.
Yeah, lots of people are saying that. I know somebody in a British person in Poland who's also thinking of getting recovering her Polish citizenship. So we'll see what. Well, not recovering it. Her parents had it, and she's trying to get it again because she's also worried about the situation here in Britain. Whether it's better in Poland, I really don't know.
No Sense says, most guilty of all is the judicial class. Judges above all, they revel in the despotic power brought by their complicity with the political power.
I completely agree. Once upon a time, judges were the first line of defense. I mean, in the event that this sort of thing, which we're seeing in Canada, were actually happening, we would be getting, by this point, resolutions from, applications for injunctions to the courts, and the courts would be granting them. Because, as I said, this is a clear abuse and misuse of powers. It's not happening, and that is extremely disturbing.
Paulie says, in the Netherlands, the Emergencies Act was put in place the 1st of December 2020. Every 3 months, it can be continued. So happy with the Duran.
Well, there you go. It's happening in Canada. It's ready in the Netherlands. It will be applied and done in lots of places. Also,
I heard New Zealand, they're doing stuff like that too,
yeah,
I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I really wonder if this is a trial balloon.
Yeah.
Kurt says the Ukrainians realize that they don't want war. So why is shelling increased by 400%, indicating that the troops are not under Kiev control?
Well, it's possible, but I mean, we don't yet know. But let me just see, because we've now we've now got more of a statement. This comes from Pushilin, who is the who is the leader of the Donetsk Republic. He says that the Ukrainian rebels are expecting President Zelensky to order an offensive in the nearest future. The military forces are prepared to fight, but civilians in rebel-controlled areas are at risk of being caught in the crossfire. That is why, starting today, a mass evacuation of people to the Russian Federation has been organized. He added that vulnerable groups like women, children, and the elderly would be given priority. He says that Russian officials in the neighboring Rostov region are expecting an inflow of evacuees and will provide them with what they need. There will be conditions on border crossings to expedite the process. And he urged to heed the warning and take the right decision, saying that the relocation would be temporary and would save lives. The statement was released after ODYSEE monitors observers deployed to eastern Ukraine to monitor the situation along the dividing government-controlled parts of the country, and territories held by the rebel forces reported a surge in hostilities this week. It looks to me, I have to say, like things I've seen happen before. So I would not myself assume too much about it for the moment.
It's happened before.
It's happened before. So there's been a major crank up. There's been a major crank up on the fighting on the conflict line. We will see whether there is, in fact, a Ukrainian offensive. The people in the militia seems to say that they're ready for it, but they're taking action to protect civilians in the event that such an offensive does take place. Mm-hmm.
Real quick, do you think that the militia is ready for an offensive?
Yeah, well, he says, and I'm sure they are. And if
your assessment,
they obviously are. I mean, they probably wouldn't be able to hold out indefinitely by themselves, or probably even for very long. But as I said, the Russians have previously said that they would be prepared to take action if it happened. So that's, I suspect, what would be the case.
Aren't the republics in Donetsk and Lugansk, aren't they now better prepared, better trained, and better equipped than what they were previously during the Civil War?
On a far much better scale. I mean, when the war started in 2014, we were talking about very, very lightly armed militia. It took ages before they got themselves organized and were ready to fight and launch counteroffensives and things of that kind. So they're much better organized than they were back in 2014. I'm going to say straight away, as I said, I think that we mustn't make the assumption that this is an outright. We've got to be prepared. This may not be the start of of a war. As I said, I have seen things like this happen before. So let's be a little bit cautious about it.
Okay. Juha, thank you for your super sticker. Irish Partisan said, would you guys be open to having the likes of Jimmy Dore, Jackson Hinkle, George Galloway, Caleb Maupin, Aaron Monte, Max Blumenthal on the Duran for a live chat? Yes.
Absolutely. Of course we would be.
Would be great. Yeah. Would be an honor to have them on.
Yeah,
Stan Littman says, China has a heart. It will stop the war by not funding it, though it would win if it were the sole survivor.
This is presumably World War III. Yes, I don't think it's going to be a war. I mean, I don't think we're looking at a World War type situation. War in Ukraine, possibly. War in Donbass, very possibly. But World War, hardly.
Yeah. Raphael says, guys, let us be real. USA knows this clearly. China and Russia are not planning to fight Taiwan nor Ukraine. They are going to fight USA, not NATO.
Yeah, well, I can see the logic of that too.
Okay, and I'm seeing. Let me 1 sec, Alexander. Let me jump into locals here and see what people are saying on locals. Have you heard about Chrystia Freeland's NAZI grandfather, and now she is enacting Canada's Fire Decree and Enabling Act? Well, she, yeah, we've heard about Freeland's past.
Yes,
we're very well aware of it.
Absolutely, very well.
She's very anti-Russian to the core. Yeah. What are the chances that there's a Patriot Act-like bill waiting on Pelosi's desk, which will be passed if Canada goes violent?
Pelosi's desk? You mean Canada's? Canada? Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've already made it clear that I am sure that if this thing succeeds in Canada, it will be exported elsewhere, and it will be exported to the United States. Of course, it will, given that the United States is so heavily involved in what is going on in Canada.
Yeah. Let's see here. Thank you, Adrian, for that super chat as well. All right. And let me jump into locals again. Don't take your eyes off of the Pacific.
Yeah.
China.
Absolutely. China, of course. Absolutely. China is very, very important in this. It's the Taiwan, the Pacific. That's the real place of the confrontation that's taking place at the moment.
Yeah. Leafy Bug says, at the start of the Biden administration, it was quite clear that his cabinet picks were either tired or lower tier Obama remnants. But did anyone imagine these people could be this bad at their jobs? To be fair to them, they wouldn't look so bad if they had a boss who appeared to be in control.
Absolutely true. I completely agree with that. In fact, we were asked that question by Robert Barnes on that Viva Frei program, which we discussed the other day. We too thought that, and I was asked directly, did I imagine that this would be as chaotic and incompetent an administration as it is? And the answer is I didn't. I did expect it to be chaotic. I did expect it to be incompetent, but I didn't expect it to be this bad.
Adrian Hart says, Durham has news on Clinton. Will Hillary get what's coming to her this year?
Well, Hillary. I hope so. I hope so. I mean, you know, he's doing what good investigators do. He's moving in from he's picking off the little people as he moves closer, ever closer to the center. By the way, she published a very rattled statement, a very rattled tweet about all of this, and linked to an article which basically didn't say anything and was written by one of her, you know, sidekicks. So I think she's rattled, actually.
Yeah, I think she's preparing to run 2024.
Yeah,
well, I think she's going to throw her hat in the ring.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I mean, you know, if Kamala bombs and pushed aside, then you know, maybe we will see an attempt over the next few days, or well, months maybe, to try and bring her in as the new Veep, the new vice president. And well, I don't know, but anyway, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. The English loyalist says, would it be wise to leave the U.S.? I don't support the Biden admin, nor the way the country is going. I don't want to be part in the U.S. empire.
Well, lots going to happen before we get to those sort of situations, it seems, or so it seems to me.
Kurt says the Donbass will win against the Ukrainian army, not only because of help from Russia, but also because they have something to fight for.
I think that's probably true, but, you know, let's wait and see what happens. I mean, we mustn't make assumptions, as I said, that there is a big offensive from the Ukrainians really on the cards. There's been all kinds of muddled comments from the Ukrainians as well. And as I said, I think they must be very nervous about the situation, actually.
I mean, for Ukraine to attack East Ukraine, they know that if they attack and should they succeed in the offensive, that Russia's going to come in and crush them. So, I mean, why do it if you know you're going to lose sooner or later?
Exactly. I mean, I want to stress this is the statement from Pushilin. He says this is precautionary. Ukrainian rebels are expecting President Volodymyr Zelensky to order an offensive in the nearest future. The military forces are prepared to fight, but civilians in rebel-controlled areas are at risk of being caught in the crossfire. So this is why, starting today, a mass evacuation has been organized. So they are intending to fight, and it's not yet been ordered. I mean, you know, they're saying this is this is a possibility. Could very well be, that this is also part of trying to get maneuver space in what is now clearly also an information war. So there's clearly been a major crank up of fighting over the last few hours. I suspect that what's probably going to happen is that we're going to see frantic attempts by various people to try to calm the situation on the conflict line down.
Yeah. G. Jetta says, are there any options to protect your money from bank seizures other than withdrawal and put it under your mattress?
No, I can't think of any, actually. I mean, where are you going to put it? I mean, there are, eventually what will inevitably happen is that you start to see shadow banks starting to appear, which operate and exist beyond the regulatory system. But that's a long way off, and there will no doubt be attempts also to try and control that too. And it's difficult, but in the meantime, the only realistic thing you could do is to take your money out, it seems to me, and keep it under a mattress. What else can you do?
Bitcoin, crypto.
I know, but they're trying to
not financial advice.
Clamp down that. Yes, exactly. They're trying to clamp down on that as well, as we've seen.
Yeah, that'll fail big time. They can't.
Yeah.
Anyway, Moon Dragon says, will Putin recognize the two republics and the Duma wants it, or do you think they will play with it first? That he will play with it first.
He will play with it first. I think he did that again in case there is a Ukrainian attack. And if there is, because I'm sure that Putin gave the green light for this resolution. I mean, I can't imagine that this resolution would have happened unless Putin had given a green light for it. So I think that what he's doing, he's got it in his pocket. If there's a Ukrainian attack on the Donbass, a real offensive, such as the type that's been floated about now, and the Russians have to step in to reverse it, then at that point, the Russians will move forward, perhaps, to recognize the Donbass, the independence of the two republics. So I think that's probably what that's all about.
Maria Santos, a new member to the Duran community, with a question that says, can Canada cancel bank accounts from a British donor?
I don't think they can cancel bank accounts in Britain without agreement from Britain. So I think we haven't yet reached that point. But who knows? I mean, eventually, all the governments talk to each other, and maybe we will start to see a situation where Canada starts issuing orders, seizing money from people's bank accounts and closing bank accounts. This is then, instructions are then given to banks, and as a result of intergovernmental agreements, those instructions are then implemented across the entire Western world, if you like, the sort of collective West. So, I mean, this is where we're heading, it seems to me.
Yeah, keep in mind, if you have an American passport under the IRS FACTA rulings, if you open up a bank account outside of the United States, banks have to comply with the IRS, even if they're located outside of the U.S., even small local banks. So when someone opens up an account, say in Greece or in Cyprus, and they present an American passport, the bank has to actually report all the money that comes into their bank account to the IRS, even though the bank has no connection whatsoever to the U.S.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
We're almost there. We're almost there. J.K. Wynn says, what is Poland's view on Ukraine issue due to history between the two and Poland being part of NATO? Thank you for the vids. Are great way of informing people in California.
Poland outwardly strongly supports Ukraine. This has been their long-standing policy position. And by the way, the Polish foreign minister has just gone to Moscow and had apparently a quite civilized meeting with Lavrov. But at the moment, Poland is Ukraine's staunchest ally, stauncher even than Britain.
Which is very odd given the
history. But again, it's their visceral, or at least the current Polish government's visceral antagonism to Russia, which is what I think drives this.
Yeah. Heyman says, Russia has shown it is willing to do whatever it takes to defend Moscow. But what about the Kuril Islands or Vladivostok? Questionable. Is it vital?
Oh yes, they would defend their own territory. I mean, that there is absolutely no doubt or doubt whatsoever.
Raphael says, I was a U.S. Marine for 8 years. Military people do not talk a lot. Military people only worry about what you are doing. Max Ho is doing all the yapping. Who is speculating about stuff? Not Russia.
That is so completely correct. And if you look at all the hysteria and war talk that we've had over the last few months, it's overwhelmingly come from the civilian officials in the US and British governments. The military have been far more measured. So we haven't seen a procession of top army generals, for example, turning up in before Congress and giving, spine-chilling reports about vast Russian troop deployments. The military's been far more measured in the discussions about this issue. It's the civilians, principally the civilians in the State Department, who've been driving this.
Rob says, does it seem to you that Canada is being slowly taught it is the U.S. Dem playground, or is it only another WEF vassal state, World Economic Forum vassal state?
I think both are true. I don't see that the one is inconsistent with the other. I think both are equally true. I think that on the one hand, the Canada, the present Canadian government, is very, very much part of the globalist world order. I mean, I think Trudeau practically embodies it in all that it amounts to. That's one thing. And at the same time, there's no doubt at all that the Dems, or at least some of them, are indeed using Canada as a sort of experimental area for things that they will probably want to do with the United States.
Leafybug says, I've started a Juris Doctor course at one of the best law schools in Australia, and I have to say that most of the faculty I've encountered so far are overtly and ostentatiously ultra woke. It is remarkable how often the term straight white male pops up to be sneered at. Lots of students loudly agreeing to it. Perhaps they deemed this kind of thing. In any case, this is the future of the judiciary. Perhaps they demand this kind of thing. This is the future of the judiciary.
This is profoundly true. Once upon a time, as I very well remember, law schools and lawyers were small c conservatives, as you would expect lawyers to be. I mean, lawyers, the whole point about law is that it's extremely rigorous. It's incremental. Change is supposed to be slow. Things are supposed to be thought through very, very carefully before they're done. They're very, very careful about sticking to, applying the law properly. And of course, now what we're seeing in all over the West is that there's been a change in perspective about what law is. It's no longer a case of what the law is and what it prevents you from doing. It's what the law should do in order to enable you to promote your particular agenda. And that's a fundamental change. It's difficult to convey what a profound philosophical change it is. But I remember, my old law teachers from, the 80s. They're deeply conservative people. I mean, I don't mean they were necessarily right-wing people, but they were very, very conservative about law and very careful about, adjusting the law. Now, as I said, instead of doing that, you get judges looking for loopholes, finding ways round legal statutes in order to promote agendas in ways that I could never have imagined once upon a time.
Sidebar VR says, funny how liberals fetishize the right being secretly powerful. Really, the right are a loose grouping of dozens of small factions whose only common thing is that they are anti-left. Gauls before Caesar.
Well, let's not be quite so pessimistic as that. I think there's many different people on the left, many different groupings on the left, many different groupings on the right. And unfortunately, sometimes there's an overlap. I mean, you find some people who claim to be left, who are really right, and lots of people who claim to be right and who are really left. So it's not one single block against another block in that kind of way. And we mustn't assume that this is a sort of remorseless thing that's going to win out by itself.
I mean, looking at the U.S., I guess it is safe to say, though, that the Republicans are now a populist type of party,
Absolutely.
working class populist, where the Democrats are without a doubt
Yes.
The party of the elite East and West
Yes.
Coast. I mean, I think that's a safe thing to say
Yes.
now.
Yes, I
The
agree.
Democrats are not working class anymore.
Yes, exactly.
But that's the
That
US.
is
I'm not sure in Britain.
No. It's exactly the same in Britain. The Labour Party is increasingly disconnected from its working class roots to a degree that is just extraordinary when you remember the Labour Party as it was, and it's becoming concentrated, just as the Democrats in the United States basically reflect the views of places like, the Bay Area in San Francisco and parts of New York and those sort of places. The same is true of the Labour Party in Britain. The Labour Party in Britain essentially reflects the opinions and prejudices and philosophies of a certain type of person, middle class person, or even wealthier person than that in North London. And so it's increasingly not a populist party anymore, the Labour Party. And I think the same is true of so-called left-wing parties right across Europe.
Yeah, Peter says there's
the days when the days when the left was the party of the the common man and woman. I mean, that's really gone. They're elitist today.
Yeah. Peter says there seems to be a confusion between North American right and European right.
Yeah, I think that is true, though less true than it was, in the sense that I think that, back in the 70s and 80s, there was a decided difference. I mean, the right in the United States was politically to the right of the right in Europe, if I can put it like that. And it was more classically liberal. It adhered more strongly to free markets. It was different, whereas the European right in those days was more patriarchal. It was more, based on traditions of aristocracy and things of that kind. I think that's eroded. I think the American right, or at least the sort of rhino right, has become more like the European right in some respects. And I think that and of course the European right, or what calls itself the European right, in many, many cases has sort of morphed into sort of Angela Merkel, Mark Rutte type right, which basically has moved even further to the left. So, the categories are not as clear, both in the United States and in Europe, as they used to be.
Stan says, Patriot demands follow Constitution, use silver dollar standard, 30,000 in a congressional district.
Yeah.
Patriot demands. Thank you, Stan, for that.
Stan.
Very good point there. And Raphael says, guys, you must elaborate on this. When Putin asked Lavrov, should we give you more time? I have never seen anything like this before in Russia. Explain.
Oh, no. I mean, that is entirely typical of Russia. The Russians never move. As the famous saying goes, they're slow to get on their horses, but when they do move, they move extremely fast. So what happened was the Russians set out their demands back in December. The US finally sent its reply at the end of January. Lavrov has formulated his response to the American response, and he then put it before Putin. Putin then said to him, "Is there any point in pressing on with this?" And Lavrov said, "Well, let's wait and see what the Americans say." And he's due to meet Blinken next week. This is entirely standard. It's very
Lavrov is meeting Blinken next week.
But yeah, apparently there's talk that he's going to be meeting Blinken at some point over the next few days. So this is entirely normal way that the Russians work. They tend to build up incrementally to a position where they then feel strong enough to, or not just, strong enough. They've ticked all the boxes, and then they can move forward and do what they need to do. So that's I think what we're seeing.
Kurt says, when dictatorship is a fact, revolution becomes a right. Victor Hugo.
Absolutely. And of course, wasn't the United States founded on that principle? I mean, I don't remember the exact words of the American Declaration of Independence. Many people will know about this, but doesn't it explain that when governments become oppressive, there is a right to revolution. Now, we are heading there. I'm not saying we are quite there yet, but we're very, very close.
Yeah. Lord Charfield says, seizing bank accounts affect the way an employed person is paid, so it could impinge upon someone's employment and reveal their political leanings to a potentially hostile employer.
Yeah, of course it could. Absolutely. It would. It not only could, it would. Because bear in mind, if an employer has to pay his or her workers, so if they discover that the worker's account has been frozen or seized and they can't put any money into that account, then what's the employer supposed to think? They will start to ask why, and of course at that point all sorts of possibilities start to appear. Politics starts to play a role. This is a very dangerous and sinister thing that's happened. It cannot be understated how dangerous it is.
Yeah, I agree. They've really ratcheted things up to a level that I wasn't expecting. W. Baker says, important points to remember. The Great Reset wasn't supposed to happen until 2050. Then it was 2030. Now it's 2022. They have nothing in place. So it's going to be an effing mess with all kinds of cack-handed moves of trying to limit speech, movement, and financial transactions as Davos boomers move off the scene.
Yes, exactly. Well, I don't know whether it's actually been moved forward in that way, but what it shows is the increasing urgency and desperation that is attached to making this exercise succeed.
Can the U.S., having been informed of the existence of a foreign bank account, force a foreign bank to freeze the funds of a U.S. citizen or confiscate those funds? Are there such treaties allowing the U.S. to do that?
No, there are not such treaties. But of course, the United States claims unlimited jurisdiction. And on top of that, it sanctions. It now has what are called secondary sanctions. So if it imposes sanctions on some individual, let's say some individual in Italy, and then Italian banks which don't comply risk being penalized by secondary sanctions imposed by the United States. So that's the way it's done. Of course, it was all justified initially, by the way, all the way back when all these rules and mechanisms were created. It was all justified on the basis of fighting money laundering and dealing with terrorists and drug traffickers. Well, we see how it's evolved, and we see the speed at which it's evolved.
Yeah. And a lot of foreign banks now, when you come in with a U.S. passport, a lot of foreign banks are very hesitant to open up an account for you. I mean, they do it, but you can just see that they're like, crap, because they carry with it now a lot of regulation and liability and monitoring. And you can just see they don't like it because they carry a lot of risk because of those laws.
Exactly.
Yeah. Johan, thank you for your super chat. And Sanjeva says, sorry for being angry last week about Kamila Valieva affair. Russians need to see themselves as besieged and need to have a well-oiled media soft power machine. By the way, do you guys think that this was an own goal from the Russians? I guess in reference to the Olympics and Valieva.
Well, I think it was in the sense that the Russians perhaps ought to have been more prepared for it. But there's limits to what you can do. Now, I want to stress again, I mean, we haven't yet got the whole story about this. There's apparently more tests going to be done on another sample. But whatever it is, the way this young woman, this girl, has been treated has been brutal. And you see the collapse that she had over her routine. Her career essentially, I think, has been destroyed, and the country is indeed under siege, and Russians are under siege. Now, yesterday I went to my gym. I have a trainer whom I sometimes go to, And this trainer actually, she doesn't know my views about general things, but she actually volunteered the point that Russian athletes are being picked on, and this is somebody who works in sports, and she cited this as the example. And she also said that lots of other people do the same thing, and it isn't picked up on in the same way.
Yeah, you could see that all the pressure really rattled Valieva.
Well, of course it did.
It got to her.
I understand that on one occasion she had to sit and wait in a room for 7 hours. 7 hours while she was waiting for a decision. And I'm not quite sure which decision, but there's been a whole series of them. Imagine what that does to you when you're trying to train up for the Olympics. In the middle of an Olympic performances. It's just, it is beyond cruel what was done.
They did the same to Djokovic in Australia. They made him wait at midnight till all the way in the morning in a little room. So it's.
I don't think this is so different, by the way, from what we've been talking about, about Canada and seizing bank accounts and things of this kind. This is cruel playing with people, and that's what happened with Valieva, what's happened with Djokovic, and now we see it being done to the Trump truckers. It's
exactly.
There is a cruelty to like this. It's like a cat playing with mice.
And every time someone says, "Oh well, the Russian athlete deserved it," or Djokovic deserved it, whenever they say stuff like that, I laugh inside, because I say, you know what? Everything they're doing to these people is just going to get imported back into your country, and it's going to be, they're going to do the same thing to you. And we've seen it happen with Patriot Acts. We've seen it happen with regime changes that have happened abroad, and now they're happening inside the country. There's surveillance. All of the things that were exported for outside have now been imported. Exactly.
They've been imported. It was inevitable. It was bound to happen.
Kurt says, to punish the oppressors of humanity is clemency. To forgive them is barbarity. Maximilian Robespierre.
Well, indeed so. Didn't Thomas Jefferson said that the tree of liberty must be watered with the blood of tyrants? So there we go. So that was Thomas Jefferson, who, of course, was sympathetic to the French Revolution.
Yeah. Raphael says, okay, I believe Russia is no longer talking to the governments of NATO nations. Russia is talking directly to the citizens. Russia is telling them Russians are Europeans like you, and they are lost.
Well, I think that's true to some extent, but of course, it's very difficult for the Russians to get those kind of words across because, well, bluntly, it's very difficult to penetrate through the Western media blockade. But what the Russians do is that they do continue to talk to Western governments. So, as I said, there is another meeting between Blinken and Lavrov being set up. We've had the Polish foreign minister in Moscow. We've had the Italian foreign minister in Moscow. They both met Lavrov there. We've had Macron and Scholz in Moscow. All sorts of things are going on. So, they do still talk to Western governments. They have to. What choice do they have?
Toilet Sauce says, hypothetically, Ukraine launches a war against the Donbass, fails against Russian-supported militias like it did before, and Russia recognizes the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk. Would other regions in Ukraine declare their own independence?
I was reading yesterday that if there was a failed Ukrainian offensive in the Donbass, then there are already preparations underway, apparently, to transfer the Ukrainian government to Lviv. So that might be what happens, in which case it is entirely possible that the kind of scenario that you outlined might actually take shape. The places like Odessa, Kharkov might start to break away. If the government abandons Kiev, that is entirely possible. But of course, these are scenarios that are not yet acting out. Let's wait and see.
Has it been confirmed that the U.S. Embassy moving to Lviv is permanent? I've read it's permanent. Is that confirmed or no? Or the UK as well?
I haven't seen it confirmed, but it's increasingly looking as if it is.
What does that tell you?
Well, I've said all along, it is increasingly looking to me as if there's some sort of agenda to abandon central and eastern Ukraine and to concentrate in western Ukraine, which can be presumably is more defendable.
What does that mean? Abandon center?
Well, I'm not sure this has been thought through. I mean, I think maybe the idea is, to sort of pull back from central and eastern Ukraine, which, to be very clear, is, we're talking about 4/5 of Ukraine now. Pull back from that and, leave it dangling as this invitation for the Russians to move in, because there would be chaos otherwise, presumably. And at that point, use that as a pretext to impose sanctions and to do all these things that we've been hearing so much about over the last few days. So that may be what's happening. I mean, it's very difficult to make much sense of what's going on, because the logic of so many of the statements that have been pouring out of Washington and London is difficult to understand. And some of their actions are very difficult to understand. Also, pulling their embassies from Kiev to Lviv at this particular point in time is crazy. It's nuts. As somebody pointed out to me in an email, even if there was a war, you keep your embassies functioning in Kiev. I mean, it's ludicrous to pull them out at this point. It's a Saigon moment before Saigon has fallen. I mean,
exactly.
It's very weird.
It's like a surrender before anything has even happened.
Before anything has even happened, exactly. Yeah.
Let's see. Robute says that crypto is being clamped down because people are not using proper measures and keeping the crypto on the exchange. Get a hardware wallet and use disposable crypto address, then swap with Monero and then convert back using a KYC exchange into another address with no attachments to KYC. You're right to definitely get it off the exchanges. That's the most important part.
Yeah,
and
I have to. I mean, I'm afraid this is things which I simply I'm not able to talk about at all.
Well, just get it off of the centralized. Yeah, get it off of something centralized. That's how that's how Trudeau and Freeland are going after it. They're going off of the centralization companies. Get it off the centralized exchanges. Let's see. Dan says people must realize that fleeing their country is not the answer, as this is global tyranny. Time to make a stand peacefully for your rights and country. Tyranny dies in daylight.
Well, true. I completely agree. Tyranny does die in daylight. I am convinced that in time, eventually, there will be a pushback against all of this, and we will see it all. We will see it all fail eventually. But I've also always felt that authoritarian direction would intensify, and we see it in Canada. And I have to say, when I see it in Canada, a country like Canada, it shocks and depresses me, even though I anticipated it. If you follow our videos over the truckers, we've been talking about the fact that a crackdown was coming. We've been talking about it for weeks. And it's happened. I have to say, the way it's been done is even more sinister than I anticipated. I mean, I expected something like, the riot police being brought out. I never thought that they'd go further and start seizing people's money and doing that without court orders.
Yeah. It's shocking. And the arrests that we saw yesterday of so-called convoy leaders was just absolutely shocking.
Well, indeed. And at which point, again, I come back to this. I mean, presumably these people have to be prosecuted. I mean, will the courts uphold these prosecutions, given the deeply unconstitutional, illegal way in which this is being done?
People in Canada, let us know in the comments what you guys think.
Yeah.
I mean, what can we say about it? You watch it and you just sit there and you're just, what the hell's going on? What is Trudeau thinking?
Yes.
Let's see. Mike Watts, thank you for your super chat. And the question from Mike is, before the Biden administration, we saw the China-Russia alliance shaping up against the U.S.-led West. Since Biden, do you see the Western sphere splitting into the Anglosphere and continental Europe?
There are some signs of this. I mean, going back to that Security Council session that happened yesterday, if you go to the United Nations website, one of the most interesting things about it is the fact that the French and the Germans, especially the French, were much more measured in their language than the Americans and the British. So there's already a certain tonal difference. But for the French and the Germans to actually take the enormous leap of formally breaking with the Americans and the British, well, at the moment, I have to say, one senses that they're very unhappy about what the Americans and the British are saying and doing, but they're not yet prepared to make that leap. We're not talking about strong leaders. Scholz, as I said, I was following him whilst he was in Moscow, and he came across to me as a sort of rather bumbling character, certainly not the kind of person who I really see taking a strong stand. And, we said some complimentary things about Macron recently, but, my underlying view about Macron is that he's a very conceited individual, and he's certainly no great leader of France. I mean, he's not a de Gaulle. I mean, even if he likes sometimes to imagine he is. So, we are still seeing leaders who are weak and uncertain about what to do and are terrified of going against the authority, not just of the United States, but of the globalist order to which they belong.
Irish Partisan says the biggest issue that has been ignored is the big hike in food prices. The EU and US sanctions placed on Belarus has contributed to this. Belarus produces 20% of the world's potash. Potash is used in fertilizer.
Yeah, this is completely true. You're absolutely right. It's affecting households all over the world. It's created immense pressure on household incomes. It's going to get worse with the rise in energy prices that we're seeing. So it is an extremely bad situation indeed. And it's amazing that this situation has happened and isn't being talked about in the way that it should be.
Yeah, just prices going up across the board. That's it. Yeah.
Yes.
Zarael says, yes, Alexander, but Schultz cursed, and that's rare.
Yes, he did. He did. That's true enough. He did curse, but cursing is one thing. I mean, if you were to come out, if Scholz and Macron were to issue a joint statement, just a joint statement, saying straightforwardly, Germany and France do not support Ukraine's membership of NATO and insist upon full implementation of the Minsk agreement, including talks between Kiev, the government in Kiev, and the people in the Donbass. That would end the crisis, and it would end this period of tension that we are seeing. And it's not a difficult thing to do, actually, if you think about it. I mean, what realistically would the US do against them? And there'd be rage. The Atlanticist media would be frothing.
Why doesn't he do it?
But why don't they do it? Well, because I think they're scared is the short answer. They don't
what?
Want to. Well,
what are they scared of?
Well, I don't know. As I said, these don't look to me like very strong or impressive people. A de Gaulle would have done it. A Willy Brandt would have done it. These are little men. Macron, is a little bigger than some of the others, but these are little men. And what they want is a quiet life, ultimately. And they're scared of the, Atlanticist reaction, including the Atlanticist and globalist reaction within their own countries. The German media is almost entirely Atlanticist in its political orientations, and to an extreme degree. It's almost worse than the British media, by the way, and that's saying something. So, they're frightened. They're scared of coming out and saying those things. Maybe one day they will. Maybe things will become so hard for them that they have no choice. But at the moment, they're still dithering, they're playing, they're trying to avoid having a situation where the US imposes sanctions on Nord Stream 2. They're talking in all sorts of ways, trying to find ways around. And whether, as I said, at the end of the day, it will ever really crystallize into anything substantive, well, we'll see.
Alan says, woke is used as a banner to hide behind their class hatred.
Oh, yeah, I could see a lot of truth in that. Because, of course, it's also a way of targeting the working class, who are seen as being anti-woke.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing. Class war fought by the left against the working class. Whoever would have thought it? I mean, that's
the left is going after the working class. The liberals in Canada are attacking the working class.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who would have thought it?
It's crazy. Let's see. Pathetic Albion says Ukraine is a distraction, or they would have done something without this pathetic drama. And W. Baker says, what do we know about the U.S. Kiev document shredding?
Well, what we know, to answer the second question, they shred all the documents. They smashed all the computers in the embassy. They basically destroyed everything they had to leave behind. And that's remarkable. That in itself is remarkable. It's also disgraceful, by the way. I mean, it's a shocking thing to do. So that suggests, by the way, that there's an awful lot in those computers and in those documents which might have implicated all sorts of people in Ukraine, which the US embassy doesn't want, presumably, the Russians to find out, or maybe someone else in Kiev one day to find out. So that's what we're seeing there. Now, sorry, I forgot the first part of the question. Can you?
Distraction, Ukraine.
It is a distraction, and that's the title of our live stream today. Keep focused on Russia and, by extension, Ukraine. Ignore the horror of what is happening in Canada, and all the and all the other things. The rises in food prices, the rises in energy prices, the fact that interest rates are going to start rising, which is going to hammer people even more. Talk about everything else apart from what, talk about Ukraine and Russia, but don't talk about the things that really concern and affect people in their everyday lives.
Biden hinted during a speech last week when he was talking about the Russian invasion, he hinted at the rise in energy prices.
Absolutely.
I mean, he threw it out there.
And he's going to blame it all on Putin. That's what the intention seems to be.
Yeah. From RT Alexander, time for Ukraine to end the Donbass war, Putin.
Yeah.
What Putin said is, speaking following talks with the Belarusian leader Lukashenko on Friday, Putin said that Kiev needs to sit down with representatives from Donbass to secure a permanent ceasefire.
Absolutely. Yeah. I suspect.
What does that tell you that he came out with a statement like that after this evacuation stuff that's been
I think that this is what we're looking at here is a piece of theater, to be straightforward about this. I think that this is a way of intensifying pressure to try to get this ceasefire in the conflict line crystallized. So I think that that's what this is all about.
I want to ask you a question before I get to more questions from Super Chat and locals in the stream. During Blinken's address to the UN, he said that Russia is a signatory to the Minsk agreement. Does that mean that Russia is bound by the Minsk agreement? Because I know that signing the Minsk agreement was the OSCE, Russian representative, Donetsk and Ukraine. But does that mean that Russia was part of the agreement, or
right?
They're overseeing it?
This is completely mendacious. Russia is a signatory of the Minsk agreement, but if you read the Minsk agreement, or to call it more precisely, the Minsk package of measures, it sets out exactly what each party needs to do in order to implement its terms. And the basic thing is, firstly, there has to be a ceasefire, pullback of troops. That has to be done by Ukraine and by the militia, but it's never properly happened. It also requires negotiations, and there's a timetable for those negotiations between Ukraine and the militia to agree the terms of autonomy for the Donbass, a new constitution which will set out the federal structure, decentralized structure of Ukraine, new elections, new national elections, at which point, at the end of that process, at the very end of that process, Ukraine is to regain control of its border with Russia. So Russia actually is not mentioned in the Minsk package of measures, but it signed the agreement together with Germany and France. I mean, are Germany and France also parties? If you put it in that kind of way, it signed them. It signed that agreement because it is part of what is called the Normandy Four, which is this group of countries, Russia, Germany, France, and Ukraine, which are supposed to supervise the implementation of the package of measures. And so it has a supervisory role alongside Germany and France, which, as I said, also signed the Minsk agreement. But the implementation needs to be done by Ukraine and by the militia in the Donbass. And I would add that the United States is also, in a sense, bound by the Minsk agreement, because after the Minsk agreement was implemented, was signed off, the Russians, I think to the annoyance of the Western powers, took it to the UN Security Council, and they proposed a resolution, a UN Security Council resolution requiring its implementation, and the UN Security Council unanimously voted for it. And of course, the United States and Britain cast their votes in support of it. So Russia signed it, Germany signed it, France signed it, Ukraine signed it, the militias signed it. As you know, you've been in business, you know that terms of a contract are implemented by the people who are required to implement those particular terms. And the terms of this particular contract, this particular agreement, very clearly say who is supposed to do what.
Yeah, because they always make it seem like Russia was a part of the conflict when they bring up the Minsk agreement.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, you know, they're talking about everything about it except the document itself. Document is very clear. It's very short. It's very clear. It's just about 2 pages long, as I remember. It's very, very clear. It even sets a timetable, along with dates, by the way, which were, of course, never adhered to.
Interesting. All right. Stan Lippman says Marx was funded by banks. It's Babylonian logic.
Yeah.
We have a history show up tomorrow, and I think we do discover a little bit of Marx's influence on Lenin. So stay tuned for that. Edward says, one of my closest friends was born and lived in Odessa for 20 years. He said it is Russian and would welcome the Russian army with open arms as liberators. Is this realistic?
Well, can I just say something? I was just reading a short while ago a long article in the Financial Times, no less, which basically said the same thing. They went to Odessa, clearly hoping to find, you know, words of defiance against the Russians, and what they found instead was, on the contrary, outside the trade union building where there was that fire, where people were burned to death, anti-Maidan protesters were burnt to death. There was a memorial put up there by the people of Odessa, saying, you know, we will never forget, and we will never forgive. And clearly, that's and as I said, the Financial Times found that sentiments in Odessa were overwhelmingly pro-Russian, and I'm sure what you say is true.
Zariel says maybe Hillary's server. It would have to be a really bad move to put Hillary up as president. As president, my God.
It would. I mean, I will say this: if she was up against Trump, she would lose. If she's up against DeSantis, it would be a landslide. I mean, it would be an overwhelming landslide, and I think she would lose against any Republican. To be straightforward about this, always assuming, of course, that the election is conducted properly. Now, you know, we're on YouTube, so I'm not going to say more about that, but I think we all know what I mean. Look what's happening in Canada now as well.
I can't believe we talk about this with the context of the United States or Canada if the election is fair.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
crazy. Oh boy. Damas says, this is James from Texas. Please address the game of U.S. sanctions on Syria, Iran, Russia, Afghanistan. Will sanctions at the global scale lead to war?
Well, can I just say something before we get onto that? I mean, I was talking some time ago to a business person, somebody in the shipping world, shipping being, of course, something that lots of Greeks are into. And he said that the sanctions regime has now become so complicated and so enormous that for ship owners, it's become a nightmare. Because let's assume you come to a port in Pakistan. You might be loading goods there, and the company that you're taking goods from might have some connection somewhere down the line to somebody who's been sanctioned. It's not impossible. At which case, you risk falling foul of secondary sanctions yourself. It is having a freezing effect, not on a huge scale, but an increasing freezing effect on world trade, because business people, shippers, who, of course, 90% of world trade is done on ships, are finding it incredibly difficult to navigate around this system. And it's getting bigger and more complicated and more rigorously enforced all the time. And always remember, there is no legal recourse to it. You can't go to a court. Which court? So it's having that effect on the smooth operation of world trade and of the world economy. And if you think this isn't playing a role in the supply chain crisis and in the inflation we're seeing, well, I have a bridge to sell you. Now, will it lead to war? Well, eventually, conceivably, I hope not a world war. But of course, when you're sanctioning people, how do you talk to them?
It's a form of war, though.
It is a form of war, exactly.
Yeah. Peter says Trudeau overreaching in Canada and Biden being so incompetent may be good. Reclaim of freedom and repeal of bad laws is rare. Best end, we get rid of the Patriot Act, the NFA, and the GCA by the end.
Well, you may be right about this. It's often said that, things have to get a lot very bad before they can get better. But my God, they're getting not just bad, they're getting extremely bad. And of course, people are being affected in the meantime. People whose money is being stolen, people who are being arrested on the basis of unconstitutional provisions, all sorts of things like this. I would repeat again, I do hope the courts in Canada do put a stop to this. There's some judges in Canada left who have integrity and understand what the law is and how.
But someone has to bring the cases to those courts, don't they? I mean,
well, absolutely. Well, again, I hope that there are lawyers in Canada who have the courage and the knowledge of the law and the personality and the force of personality to do it. As we've discussed in programs with Robert Barnes, one of the great things about the United States is partly because the United States is so big and the structure there is indeed so federalized, much more federalized than Canada actually is, I suspect. You do find American citizens who are prepared to bring these cases, and you do find American lawyers who are prepared to represent those American citizens in these cases. Robert Barnes himself has done this. And that's why you get pushback against decisions in the United States. Will we see the same in Canada? I hope so. But to be very clear, the legal culture in Canada is very different. It's based on the British system, the British model, not the American model. And the British model is much more, dare I say it, hierarchical and aristocratic and ultimately authoritarian. That's the first thing. And secondly, do people have the confidence in Canada to act like that? Are the lawyers in Canada to act like that, given that Canada doesn't have the strength that the US Constitution still gives to people in the United States? Well, we will see.
We will see. David says, it was clear that Ford, the Premier of Ontario, was going to clear the trucks this weekend. Trudeau decided to be a big man and upstaged him.
Well, that's absolutely right. I'm sure that's true. It doesn't change in any way the monstrous nature of what's being done.
Raphael says, guys, do you understand that now Russia and China together produce and export more foods from the USA than the USA and England combined? Oil is another story. Sanctions?
Yeah. Very good point.
You can't really sanction Russia. I mean,
no.
At this point, can you?
Well, you can do some damage, but can I just say, this is the other thing to say. I mean, they can inflict some hurt, but they would suffer badly themselves. And of course, in a couple of years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, when the financial systems have merged, when the oil and gas trade is more organized, when the pipelines are built and working, sanctions will just bounce off.
They're already bouncing off, yeah.
Bouncing off. And the United States, it's all very well. They can't really sanction China. I mean, that's the thing to say about this. I mean, they could try and choke off China's imports of raw materials, but if they start restricting China's exports, sanctioning China's exports of goods, then of course that will multiply the supply chain crisis beyond anything we can ever imagine. American companies now, American businesses depend on China to an extraordinary degree for what they produce. So, you'd see inflation explode far beyond what we're seeing now. Of course, if you pursue a policy, a Hamiltonian policy, you start operating protectionist measures, and you do that simultaneously with promoting local industries and do this incrementally and steadily over time, well, you can follow that kind of policy and it can achieve results. It will take a long time, but it could be done. America first, in other words. It's never even been attempted. Trump talked about it, but he was distracted by Russiagate. He couldn't do it, and he never found people who would do it for him. And this administration, well, their chances of doing anything like that are precisely zero.
Ashraf says, why isn't the USA invading Canada like Syria and Libya to remove this tyrannical government?
Oh, because it's got the government in Syria that it wants. In Canada that it wants. Exactly what the government in the US tells it to do. I mean, as I said, we did that program in which we went through that readout between Biden and Trudeau, and Biden was telling Trudeau what to do, and Trudeau was clicking his heels and promising Biden, the supreme commander and great leader, I find that almost astonishing to say that like that. He was clicking his heels and promising to do exactly that.
Yeah. Let's see. Gus says, I was appalled at both Truss and Schultz's performance in Russia. Where do they get these people from? Best geopolitical commentary on YouTube. Where do they get these people from?
Well, we've been talking for a long time about the collapse of leadership quality in the West. If you restrict your leadership class to this incredibly narrow circle of people, then you will see it decline. Because these are not politicians, they're not leaders. They are low-level, middle-rank functionaries. They're nothing more than that. And all right, Liz Truss was just embarrassingly awful and ridiculous. But Scholz is the leader of Germany. He's the chancellor of Germany. He occupies the post which Bismarck used to hold, and other people like Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt and Helmut Kohl. I'm not going to mention a certain Austrian gentleman, but anyway, he occupies a post in which he's leading a great European power. You read his comments and listened to what he said while he was in Moscow. You couldn't really believe that this plugging provincial bureaucrat was really the leader of Germany. I mean, it just didn't seem conceivable that he could be this. I have to say, I was disappointed with Scholz.
Yeah. I agree with you there. From where am I here? 1 second. W. Baker says Trudeau is banking on court delays.
Yeah, I'm sure he is.
There's another comment, Alexander, which on the courts, which says one case has been brought in Canada for the violation of the Charter of Rights by the only living person who actually helped to write the charter.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go. Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, and I think that's probably true. He's going to try and spin out these legal cases as long as he possibly can. But can I just say that can only be done if the courts collude with it? If the courts reject this, if they insist on, the government getting its act together quickly and start making decisions fast, which in an emergency situation like this they ought to do, then in that case, that kind of ploy can't succeed. So it's all very well saying, the courts will eventually come round to do the right thing. But, if that takes 3 months, 6 months, a year, it doesn't really change anything. You need to make those decisions now.
Yeah.
And these are emergency situations. This is a situation where, as I said, the courts have to act to defend the law and the political and constitutional structure in Canada, because it is under severe threat.
Sparky says worldwide rigged elections led to this situation.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I completely agree with that too. I mean, to be clear, there are situations where elections are, you can manipulate election outcomes in all sorts of particular ways. So to give a very good example, which is different from that in the United States, what we saw in the United States, the election in France, which led Macron to victory, was incredibly controlled. I remember following the way in which the election was being operated. And it was obvious that, all the sort of moves were being made with the eventual outcome of getting Macron elected president of France. And it succeeded.
It succeeded, yeah. Peter says, where am I here? No, I read that. Zoran says, to me, DeSantis is sketchy AF. I feel the only reason he is having the policies he is because he knows it will win votes against the Dems. It has nothing to do with freedom and all with votes.
He comes across to me as an extremely skilled and very clever politician. And no doubt, like all politicians, there's an element of opportunism about what he is doing. But if he gets elected, if he achieves high office, if he becomes president of the United States on one program and goes back and does something different, well, I will not be surprised. I will be extremely disappointed because I don't know very much about DeSantis. But I will say that if he does that, he won't remain, his reputation in the United States will be completely destroyed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I always say with people like DeSantis, I'm not going to predict the betrayal before it happens.
Tim Gibson says the world has gotten twice as bad without Assange.
Oh, yeah. Not twice. I mean, worse than that. That's why he's in Belmarsh.
Yeah. Aussie Male Tuber says, hello to everybody. Australia is under the same pressure as Canada. The support for the excesses of our leaders against protesting persons outside the left-right paradigm is aggressively strong.
Yes. No, I agree. I completely agree. But I remember reading some years ago, we talk about years ago, somebody referring to the militantly aggressive center. The center, which is militantly aggressive, that it's becoming increasingly authoritarian, it's becoming increasingly abusive of anybody who disagrees with it, and it's becoming increasingly restrictive. It's trying to close down the political space until it occupies the entirety of whatever's left.
Yeah. Raphael says, before I go to work, Russia and China have their own internet ready to go. They can decouple at any moment, but the USA can't use theirs. Pay attention.
Absolutely true. Well, of course, China already has its own internet, essentially. And the Russians have been testing the RUNet to make sure that it can operate if it's disconnected from the World Wide Web. You know, talking like that makes me deeply distressed because, of course, I was one of those people, seems incredibly naive, 10, 20 years ago, who believed that the World Wide Web would be a good thing. I never expected it would be fragmented in the way that it is going to be. That I'm sure it will be, by the way.
I agree. Everything's going to fragment, Alexander. Everything's going to fragment. Sanjeeva says, love you guys and keep up the good work. By the way, what do you think about the demographic decline in Russia? I see Russia eventual winner in this geopolitical game, if not for the dangerous decline. Your thoughts?
Yes, well, I mean, this has been a major problem. It's also a demographic decline in China. And I know that it's the single issue that worries the governments of those two countries most. And of course, I think actually that in Russia, there's been, you have to understand that there's these two big moments of demographic collapse that took place in the 20th century. One was during the Second World War, for obvious reasons. The other one was in the 1990s, and that creates echoes because during that period, during the Second World War and the 1990s, very few children were born. And when the point comes when those lost generations reach childbearing age, you see a sudden steep fall in birth rates and falls in population. Now, I understand that in Russia, this is that we've reached population fell under Putin, then rose again, then it fell back because we're now looking at again this echo. But I understand that it's coming towards its end, and the expectation now is the population is going to start growing once more. We're going to see natural population growth once more in perhaps 1 or 2 years once this echo effect has worked its way through. But this all happens against the bigger issue that just as in the West, increasingly, so in Russia and in China, people anyway are choosing to have fewer children because of economic pressures and lifestyle pressures. The Chinese and the Russian governments are looking to find ways around that. That means, creating more creches, kindergartens, childcare facilities, funding, incentives, funding for. But this is all a huge task. It's an enormous problem. We'll see how it plays out and whether they're able to do it over time. As I said, these two big problems will smooth out, but it takes a huge amount of time, given how bad the population losses in the 40s and the 90s actually were. And by the way, the extraordinary thing is that the birth rate crash in the 90s was as bad as the one in the war. So that gives you an idea of how terrible the 90s was for the Russian people.
Yeah. Orban has implemented some successful tax
very successful, and the outgoing government in the Czech Republic has managed the same thing. So it can be done.
Yeah. Sparky says authority vacuum has left Donbass to try and suck the Russians in to restore order. Instead of aid, it would be framed as an invasion by the globalists. That's an interesting take.
I think I think that is probably, there may be some element of that. But as I said, I personally think that these events have been very carefully coordinated with Moscow. And as I said, I think probably this is a little. First of all, I doubt that everybody is going to be evacuated. They'll probably evacuate some of the old people and some of the children. But I think ultimately, as I said, this is all intended to put extra pressure to get those negotiations going. Because in truth, the fighting that has happened, though serious, and it's still ongoing, by the way, isn't so serious yet as to really point to an imminent offensive. And of course, the Ukrainians have ruled it out.
Yeah. Zariel says, any info on that US-built BS Lab 3 in Kazakhstan?
No.
Have you followed that story at all?
Yeah. I haven't followed. I have followed the story, but there's very little information about it. We will find out more at some point. I would add that I understand that the Russian agents are now flooding the country, and I'm sure and Chinese agents, I'm sure as well, and are going through all the various things that have been happening there. And the new president he's not the new president, but the new leader of Kazakhstan. He's now essentially the leader of Kazakhstan. Tokayev was in Moscow the other day and a very long meeting with Putin. He also met the Prime Minister Mishustin, and it's clear to me that the Russians are moving into Kazakhstan in a really big fashion.
Do you think the British crown will survive after Elizabeth? We did a show.
I think it's touch and go. Actually, as I said, when I came to Britain in the 60s as a small child, the sense of loyalty to the crown, to the monarchy, was overwhelming. And some of the strongest loyalty was felt by working class people. Labour voting, socialist working class people in Britain were very royalist. I remember this. I remember how, there's a teenager being surprised the extent to which that was the case. But of course, what's happened over the last 30 years is that has gradually faded away. A lot of respect still for the Queen herself. I think many people like her. They respect her dignity. They think that she's she reminds them of, connects them with their past. I don't think this same loyalty is transferable easily to anyone who comes after her. And of course, this is a very deeply embedded institution in British life, but without the support of the people, it becomes extremely vulnerable. So I don't think it's quite exhausted itself yet, but I think it's, living dangerously, if I can put it like that. And, the Andrew affair has been a disaster.
Yeah. Martin says, why not create huge inflation and social unrest and geopolitical tensions to justify a totalitarian salvation?
Well, that's exactly what's happening. We can unpick the immediate causes of everything, every particular incident. But if you're asking what is the ultimate source of world tension, it is the globalist project. Be under no doubt about that. That is what is causing all the problems.
Yeah. Very, very true. Very true. Toilet Sauce says sanctions are the modern equivalent of medieval siege warfare.
Yeah, except of course that the besiegers can suffer as badly as the besieged. So that's the difference. But no, I agree. I absolutely agree. Russia is increasingly behaving like a besieged fortress. It's the country which, perhaps more than any other, is not only economically and materially, but also psychologically prepared for this. It's the sort of country which has experienced this thing many times in its history. But that's you do see a siege mentality starting to develop, and I think that's a good point.
Flying Boar says Olaf Scholz is not strong. The CDU leader would have been a better choice.
I agree. Actually, I think Armin Laschet would have been ultimately a more effective chancellor in this situation. I think his successor as the leader of the CDU, Friedrich Merz, looks actually more impressive than Laschet, and frankly, streets ahead of Scholz. But he's in opposition.
Yeah. Rich says Italy, Russia are probably going to hold a Putin-Draghi meeting. Can this bring Italy into pressuring the Ukrainians to implement the Minsk II agreements?
The Italian foreign minister, when he was in Moscow meeting, Di Maggio, I think his name is, when he was in Moscow meeting Di Maio, I'm probably getting his name.
Di Maio, I think it's
Di Maio, that's right. When he came to Moscow to meet Lavrov, actually said that Italy wants to see the full implementation of the Minsk agreement and will try to help to see it happen. Italy has very little influence in Ukraine. It's not a big player there. It does have influence in the European Council. But then again, we come back to this underlying problem. Will the Italians use that influence, which they have in the European Council to make that happen? Will Italy, for example, say in the European Council, we are not supporting sanctions unless we see, we're not even in theory supporting sanctions unless and until we see a serious effort by Ukraine to fulfill its commitments under the Minsk agreement and to sit down with the people in the Donbass. I have never forgotten a moment, an actual moment when I was at a conference of St. Petersburg. And who was there but Renzi, the former, he was Prime Minister of Italy at that time. And people were asking him, Russian journalists were asking him about why wasn't, Minsk being activated. And Renzi said, I want everybody to fulfill and do their part to get the Minsk II agreement to work. And he was saying that in 2016. And what did he do? Nothing.
Riffy says, Pepe Escobar says Donbass is evacuating its civilians to Russia. We talked about 700,000 Donbass. 700,000 Donbass is preparing for a blitzkrieg.
Well, that's what Pepe, I mean, as I said, he's obviously doing it from the same reports as we have, but we haven't got all of the reports yet. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I would be surprised if all of those people were to leave, actually.
Yeah. Amrit says, Italy, Germany are the only West Europe manufacturing powers in real sense of manufacturing. Italy has older and deeper attachment to manufacturing than Germany.
In some ways, that's very true. After all, Italy's there are Italian companies, Beretta, the people who make the handguns. I mean, they go back to the 16th century, for example. I mean, there are very, very old Italian companies that's been involved in manufacturing. But, Italy is the second biggest manufacturer in Europe after Germany. France has quite a lot of manufacturing too. So let's not completely write off France. And Airbus, of course, is located there.
Yeah, Airbus, France. From Zoran, why did those crashes in the Russian population in the 90s happen? Wasn't aware it was that bad at all.
It was very, very bad, very simple, because people weren't having children. I mean,
the
was
90s were a bad time.
Yeah, people weren't having children, and the men were dying at about the age of 50. I mean, it was maybe exaggerating a bit there, but I mean, the male life expectancy collapsed because basically men just gave up hope and turned to vodka and drank themselves to death, and the women just weren't having children because it was economically impossible to. The 90s in Russia were terrible. I mean, they were beyond awful.
Yeah,
I saw them. I was there.
Yeah. I caught it in the beginning when it happened. It was bad, really bad.
Yeah.
Otno Sens says demographic stimulus always benefits those who already have many children, religious gypsies, etc. Mainstream population needs a cultural shift.
That is actually not just true, but it's been commented upon by all sorts of people, including recently by Putin, by the way. So it is, this is a challenging thing to do, but it can be done, and it has been shown in Hungary, as I said, in the Czech Republic, in one or two other places, that if you do it well, you can actually start to get populations to grow. By the way, there's been another historical example. I mean, France in the 19th and 20th centuries had very, very low population growth. I mean, the French population was almost static. And then, of course, they also suffered heavy manpower losses during the First World War. And then a whole lot of steps were taken in the 1950s to start increasing the birth rate. And France actually did experience a birth rate boom in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s. And it came as a surprise to many people because it was not what people had expected to see in France. So you can do things, but it's not easy. It's never easy. Changing social attitudes is never very easy.
Yeah. Leafy Bug says there was a massive anti-mandate protest in Canberra last weekend. Hundreds of thousands of people marched. It's really an incredible sight when the elegantly geometric avenues that radiate towards the seat of power in pompously planned cities like Canberra are filled with people. The media did not report on this at all. A few reports mentioned hundreds of protesters. Yeah, that was a massive turnout.
Yes.
Massive turnout.
Yes. Massive turnout. Absolutely. Yeah. You're completely correct. People don't mention these things.
Yeah, the media completely ignores it.
Ignores it.
W. Baker says, speaking of population growth, how are the two little ladies, Alexander?
Growing well. In fact, they're doing remarkably well. One of them, I mean, the Vera, to give her name, has now has complete head control, and the other one has managed almost to get this. So they're doing extraordinarily well. We are really, really very pleased, and they're now interacting with us in ways that we just never imagined, and smiling to us and being amazing altogether. But of course, they do keep us awake still, and one has to say that it's sometimes difficult to find all the hours one needs in the day when one has two little babies to look after.
Yeah. All right, Satoshi Nakamoto, thank you very much for NOK 200 super chat. Thank you, super sticker.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that, Satoshi.
Yes.
And Rob Jano, and we'll wrap it up. We'll take a little bit more questions, Alexander. Wrap it up. It's been extremely long week, and I'm interested to dig into this evacuation story. I think you are as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think we both are. Yes.
I noticed that you're interested. I think you're thinking about it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So. I mean, we have, well, because it's, I mean, on the face of it, it's big news. But we'll find out what it means.
We'll find out, and we'll get a report out. Rob says, does Canada need a constitutional rewrite to successfully adapt to modern realities, guarantee no future Trudeau-type emergency?
Well, absolutely it does. I mean, not a rewrite. It needs to have the proper constitution and laws of Canada, which are the same as those that you will find across the democratic West, implemented properly by courts that really work. You can do all kinds of things. You can pass laws. You can legal protections. You can come up with all kinds of constitutional safeguards. But if the courts aren't doing their job, if the police are prepared to carry out these kind of orders, and if the politicians are prepared to give these kind of orders, then the safeguards are very weak. It's a cultural change that needs to happen, and that has to come from below.
Let me see here. Raphael says there is going to be a beautiful closing ceremony for the Olympic Games on the 20th. Russia promises this to China. There won't be any war nowhere. That's a good point. I doubt there'll be any kind of conflict before the 20th either. I mean,
I agree with that.
I don't think there'll be any conflict at all, but I mean, any invasion. I don't want to say conflict.
I agree with that as well. I agree with both of these points. Yeah.
Lurias, thank you for your super sticker. And Zarael says, Alexander, don't forget, true parents never sleep. Thank you, Zarael, for that.
Well, I'm not even going to tell you how much sleep I'm getting at the moment, because frankly, I sometimes wonder whether I'm getting any.
Basha says, late arrival, are Trudeau's banking actions him playing out Schwab's agenda?
Yeah, of course they are. It's exactly, I mean, if you look at what comes out of Schwab's technocratic vision, this is completely consistent with it.
Yeah. 1 second, Alexander. Real quick, I think we've got everything. Yeah. We've answered a ton of questions, both on locals and on the live chat and the super chat. So thank you for all the questions. And real quick, Alexander, to wrap up the video, let me just read you from an update with the evacuations. Western nations have been claiming for months that Russia was preparing a military invasion of Ukraine. U.S. officials stated that Moscow was preparing a false flag operation to justify an attack. Moscow continues to reject the accusations.
Absolutely, yes.
The only way hostilities could break out, Russian officials said, is if Ukraine attempts once again to use military force to take over its breakaway regions. Alexander, to close out the live stream, is this the order? Has this been the order that's that the Ukraine army has received, even if it's come from Zelensky or not, is the order attack, so that we can finally just get some sort of invasion, some sort of action from Russia to justify our rhetoric over the past 2 months.
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, we can't exclude this. I mean, these decisions, do they mean these evacuation decisions? Do they mean that the Russians have got wind of something, and that they're acting to put the civilians out of harm's way? Because of course the fighting is about to start in earnest in the Donbass, and they don't want civilians killed. Is that what this is all about? It's possible. It's absolutely possible. I'm going to make a guess that there's going to be intense phone calls going on as we speak now, between Moscow and Washington, between Moscow, Berlin, and Paris, between all of these capitals and Kiev. And we can only wait and see what's going to work out over the next couple of days.
Final question before we wrap up, Alexander. Also in Canada, how do you see this crackdown playing out for Trudeau? Do you have any feelings about it? A very violent crackdown from the Trudeau government.
It's a very violent. I mean, when you take people's money, that is a form of violence. To be very clear about this.
Threaten to take their children.
Exactly. And have threatened to take their children, do all these incredibly sinister things. I mean, this is a form of violence, and it's been carried out by the government against its own people. That's the first thing to say. I can't help but think that this is going to provoke a massive reaction in Canada. And I suspect at some point it will sweep Trudeau away. That's my own view. That's my guess. But we'll see.
Mm-hmm. We'll see. Final super chat from Toilet Sauce says, might it be that the Donbass republics are evacuating their citizens in order to put pressure on Moscow? You mean,
I'm sure there's
for recognition.
All of these things happening at the same time. So you see, it's beginning to look to me as if a lot of things are coordinated. So we had that resolution in the Duma. We've now had the evacuation order. We've had these further comments from Putin. He met with Lukashenko today. And we've had further comments, the ones that Alex just read out a few moments ago from other Russian officials. So it looks to me as if there's, the stage is being set. I'm not yet sure for what. And as I said, it would need a lot of time to work it out and find out exactly what's happened.
All right, let's get to it. Let's see what's going on, and let's wrap up the stream. Thank you to our moderators, to Alan Watson, to Cosmic Rain, to Zariel. Thank you, everybody, for helping us out on the chat. Thank you to everyone on the Locals chat. Great questions, great comments on Locals, and great questions, great comments on YouTube. And thank you to everyone that sent us super chats as well. Yes. And any final comments, Alexander? Interesting live stream, because a lot of news came in.
A lot of news came in, and it was, of course, a bit disruptive, for which apologies, because obviously I've been trying to find out a little bit more about what's been going on while the live stream's been underway, and it has been a bit disruptive. But let's not lose focus. Obviously, what's going on in Ukraine is massively important. What's going on in Canada is at least as important, because that looks to me like the shape of things to come. And that is deeply worrying. Most of my life, it's been a period, most of my life I've lived through, or so it seemed, democracy advancing. Now it's going into retreat, and it's going into retreat in the West. And I find that very, very unsettling indeed. And it fills me with foreboding, actually. And the year when this accelerated and ran out of control was 2016, after Trump was elected. With the election and with Brexit, it's clear that the globalist elite have increasingly been clamping down, and they're now becoming incredibly, incredibly intolerant of any dissidents or any intolerant voices at all.
Yeah. Paulie says in the Netherlands, most measurements have been dropped.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, that's so. So why battle in this way against your own people in Canada? I wonder whether or not that's really the agenda anymore, really to enforce these restrictions, whether it isn't really about something else, which is tightening up political controls. Whatever the cause, anyway, this is so sinister that it's beyond belief. I have always found Trudeau, I've said this many times, I mean, he's always annoyed me. That's not the right word. I mean, he's offended me in ways that no other political leader in the West has done. And well, we can see why. I mean, you know, the instincts that I've had and so many other people have had about him have been proved to be completely justified.
Yeah. Ukraine to start military up via Lugansk breakaway republic, says Pasechnik.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw
yeah,
that.
You saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder how, if something does happen, how the
Yeah.
U.S. media is going to spin it.
Well, it'd be the this is the false flag, isn't it?
That's what I'm saying.
That's
is this the false flag?
This is the false flag. Yeah.
That Blinken was referencing the other day. Yeah.
Well, it seems so.
Let's find out what's going on. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a great weekend. And we'll be putting out a lot more videos this weekend as well. So keep it posted. And that's it. We'll end it there. Take care, everybody. Wait. One more super chat, Alexander. How is it possible to go after Bitcoin if it is centralized? If it is centralized on the exchanges, they can close the exchanges. Exactly. If you have it in your own wallet and it's off of the exchanges, you're fine. That's simple. But
thank you.
Yeah, that's it. All right. Thank you very much for that final super chat. We'll end it there. Take care, everybody.
Take care.